Ja, du kan inte så.
This is a living room in the far north of Sweden.
Det var så i Boden.
It's where a Syrian couple who'd arrived as refugees are now hosting their Swedish neighbors.
If you are not a host, you are a guest. It's like that.
The hosts are Ibrahim Muhammad Haj Abdullah and Yasmin Mahmoud.
My name is Ibrahim. I'm 33 years old. I studied the law. Then I became a political activist against the dictatorial regime in Syria. Now I'm working as a teacher.
My name is Yasmin. I'm from Syria. I'm an architect. I have been living here in Sweden will be 6 years.
Yasmin and Ibrahim fled Syria when the civil war started in 2011 and ended up in a completely unexpected place.
يعني قالوا لنا إن رح تروحوا على منطقة اسمها بودن في شمال السويد.
They told us you will be going to an area called Boden in northern Sweden. We tried to Google it. Where is it? And we knew nothing about it.
فبتذكر وقتها سألنا إنه واحد من السكيورتي اللي كانوا موجودين بالكامب إنه وين.
I remember we asked one of the security people in the camp, "Where is Boden?" He told us it's here, pointing at the map. So we said, "Wow, it's far and it's cold." We heard it was going to be -30. We have come from an area where the maximum was -1. There's a big difference.
واحد يعني في فرق كبير. هي المنطقة أول ما وصلنا نحن شفنا هي منطقة عسكرية بحت يعني كان.
When we first arrived, we noticed it was a military area. There were tanks and planes, and the army was present in the city. We had escaped war. We wanted to be around civilians, to have a freer life.
All the time, I feel like it's not my homeland. I don't feel I belong to that country. I don't feel, because I feel myself like a guest all the time.
So Yasmin and Ibrahim recreated the living room, or as it's known in Arabic, al-madafa. What were you taught about hospitality? السؤال هو إنه شو هو الدرس أو الدروس اللي تعلمتوها وأنت عم تكبروا مثلاً, especially that you owe to a stranger who arrives on your doorstep. اللي لازم يتقدم لأي شخص بيجي على البيت ويدق على الباب.
أنا بتذكر بطفولتي مثلاً كانت المضافة هو هذا المكان إذا فينا نقول هو مكان مقدس الخاص بالبيت يعني. كان ممنوع نفوت على غرفة الضيوف.
I remember in my childhood, Al-Madafa was a sacred place in the home. It was prohibited for us to play inside it. This was a sacred place in the home that is always ready to welcome guests, expected and unexpected guests.
And there you can talk free. No one of them will tell the police, the secret police, about what's your viewpoint about the political situation in your homeland. And it's the first free place we had in all the Arab communities.
Since we arrived in Sweden, we haven't been able to leave behind this thing we're accustomed to, that is part of our values. We can say that our home is open, our madafa is open, and we're still receiving guests.
When Yasmin and Ibrahim first arrived in Boden, they lived in a building called the Yellow House.
No one lived there, only refugee families. If you say the Yellow House, it's mean bad area here in Boden.
But they invited people to visit them there anyway.
فبتذكر يومها بلشنا استضفنا أول شخص.
We welcomed the first person. The first time she saw us or heard our names, she was afraid. You could say there was Islamophobia.
كيف عرفتي إنها خافت؟
When she heard the name Ibrahim Muhammad, she was shocked. Her face showed it.
Wow.
فنحن بلشنا يعني نستضيفها اجت لعنا شافتنا تعاملت معنا.
So we started to welcome her. She came here.
فبعد هيك بتذكر لحد الآن صارت إنه تقول عيلتي السورية.
After that, I recall she started calling us her Syrian family. I am going over to my Syrian family. It wasn't going to be possible for us to change the stereotype about us or our community without having opened our madafa. So she was the first person. After her, we started to invite the rest. We evolved the idea and wanted to host politicians. As Arabs, we have fear from politicians, so we wanted to break that barrier between the refugee and the politician. The refugee started hosting the politicians, sit at the same table, to speak with him, to debate him. He could even force the politician to follow his tradition and habits in eating. So here we are, switching the direction of power, even if only for a few hours.
I just felt like not in the right place. It didn't really feel like the place that I belonged.
Growing up in British Columbia, Ashley Bach felt disconnected from the land around her.
It's beautiful there, like the mountains and the oceans and the Fraser River, but it didn't feel right. It felt familiar, but it didn't feel like the place that I was supposed to be. It's a side effect, I think, or maybe not even a side effect. It's like an outcome of being in the child welfare system as an Indigenous person. The current child welfare system is pretty much an extension of residential schools in the 60s scoop. Like, it's been designed to apprehend Indigenous kids and remove them from their communities and their families and their cultures as well as their territories. So, I mean, I guess it was unfortunately quite successful for me. My name is Ashley Bach. The name that I was born with, though, is Ashley John Marietta Wesley Wong. I'm a member of Mishkego-Gamongo Ojibwe Nation. That's up in northwestern Ontario, north of Sioux Lookout.
Ashley was taken into foster care at birth in a hospital in Vancouver, 3,000 kilometers away from her home First Nation. It's the latest chapter in a long story that began when her biological grandmother was sent to residential school.
It certainly had an impact on my bio mom and her life story too. She was definitely in care, definitely struggled with addictions and other issues in her life, and then had me, and then I was apprehended into care immediately.
Ashley was adopted by a white family in Langley, British Columbia.
I actually didn't know the name of my First Nation until I was in high school. So I was 16, and my parents had signed me up for the UBC summer science camp for Indigenous kids. And not everyone, but most of the kids there knew their families. They knew their communities. A lot of them were from their res. And then I walked in, and we did this circle when we first got there, which is normal to do. And everyone went around and shared who they were, what their favorite fruit was, and where they were from. And I couldn't tell people where it was from, and I was so ashamed of myself.
Ashley knew that her adoptive family had an information booklet about her background.
I snuck into my adoptive parents' bedroom and stole it out of their desk. In there was my First Nations name, and it's in Ojibwe, and it's really long. Tried to Google this community. I definitely did not pronounce the name right. I had no clue how to say it properly, and yeah, so that's how I figured out where I was from.
When she attended McGill University, Ashley Bach started thinking more about the meaning of home. And as she met more Indigenous people, her desire to reconnect with her origins grew.
My peers sort of just very gently encouraged me.
Would you call it curiosity, nostalgia, searching? How would you describe what drove you?
Curiosity, for sure. I'm just an inherently curious person. I think that's why I have a Bachelor of Science.
Obviously.
Yeah, that's why I studied environmental science and stuff.
And that interest in environmental science is what ultimately brought her to her home First Nation for the first time.
I had applied for an internship position at the Climate Change Adaptation Research Group at McGill. I got the position, and it was like my dream position. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is it. I'd assumed that they were going to pair me up with like a master's student or a PhD student, just ask me to type in data or something all summer. But they had extra funding and they said, hey, we have $5,000. Would you want to work with your First Nation? To which I said, heck yes, I want to. Did not tell them that I'd never been there. Like in my adult life, I'd never been there. I didn't tell them I was adopted. Didn't tell them I was a foster kid. I just said yes.
As Ashley Bach drove through the landscape of northwestern Ontario on her way to visit Mishki-Gogamang First Nation for the first time, something felt strange.
And I was like, oh no, this is not home.
Oh no, why?
Like it didn't feel innately correct for me to be there. Like it didn't feel like somewhere that I'd know how to like survive if I needed to. It didn't feel like somewhere that I recognized like the plant and animal species.
So it felt foreign to you?
Yeah, it did.
Her arrival in Mishki-Gogamang was chaotic.
I got in and went to brush my teeth, and the lady was like, wait, no. That area of the reserve is on like a do not drink the water advisory, and I didn't know, and so that's like my first experience.
Returning home is often about trying to reclaim family connections, both with the living and the dead.
I think I maybe had high expectations that I was going to meet a bunch of my bio family. I just assumed that my bio family had talked about me or knew that I existed or remembered that I existed, and definitely should not have had those expectations. And when I think of other former foster kids and youth in care, as well as adoptees returning home, I'm like, wow, someone really needs to be there to temper those expectations and make sure they're realistic so they don't get their hearts broken. Because it was very complicated.
Did your heart get broken?
I don't know if I'd say that my heart was broken, but I was certainly like, I didn't receive that sort of, I don't know what the feeling would be. I guess like relief or like connection that I was hoping. I found my biological grandma's obituary online, and it listed off a bunch of aunts and uncles as well as my bio mom. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna like probably meet these people. So I went up and asked for if anyone knew my uncles, and they didn't want to talk about it. And I had no clue what happened. No one would tell me. They just said, oh yeah, they used to be here. No, they're not.
Later, Ashley found out one of her uncles had died by suicide.
As much as I would like to go to Mish long term, the housing crisis there it's really bad. I don't have close enough family members to just like move into a house with 3 different generations living in it. So I mean I would like to, but it's probably just not going to happen. Like more likely I'd probably live in like Thunder Bay or Sulika, and like that's sort of the plan in the next couple of years. When I was preparing for this interview, I actually looked back through my like Instagram and Facebook posts, and I found a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2018, I went to the Anishinaabe Husky Nation's youth gathering in Thunder Bay, and I don't think I ever really write things or like say things like this, but in the post I'd written that, oh, this is like a place that feels like home, and I had a picture of they had a teepee out back behind the hotel, and I had a picture of that, and I had a picture of the city from when I was on the plane. And I mean, that is like niche territory, so I think maybe I'm starting to figure it out.
What do you remember the most about the day you left Saigon?
Well, it was April 28, 1975, and it was in the morning, very early, and we flew out of the airport here a few hours before they bombed the runway. I remember looking out the window, and I've flown in planes before, but only domestically. And it was the first time I flew out to sea. And it was very strange to see Vietnam recede into the horizon. Suddenly, I realized that all the geography class I took, drawing the borders of Vietnam were real, because here I am crossing that border for the first time, and then, slowly that country disappeared from the horizon.
Was there anything of your old life that you brought with you?
Yeah. During that time of panic, my dad was a high-ranking member of the South Vietnam Army. And so my mother was very fearful that if we left evidence of our relatives in the photo albums behind, these could be used to prosecute them under communist rule for being associated with a high-ranking member of the South. So she ordered me to burn all the photos in dozens of albums that went back for 100 years. And I just obeyed her and set a bonfire in the backyard. And what I took instead was my precious stamp collection, because I was just obsessed with stamps, stamps around the world. And so that survived. But mementos of 3 generations went up in flame. Every time I see my stamp collection now, I think I should have brought the photos.
You still have the stamp collection.
Yeah.
Nearly 45 years after he left as a refugee, Andrew Lam moved back to Vietnam part-time. What is different about the Saigon you left as a child and the Saigon you live in now? What's a lot of things, I'm sure, but what's the biggest difference?
The city that I left was a sleepy town, really, in 1975. The mega city that I live in now is very much a cosmopolitan society full of young people who have no memory of that war or anything like that. And the sheer size of it is enormous. I mean, what used to be a rice field across the river is now a new city. It keeps expanding like an amoeba. Um, so there's very little of the past here. But the irony, of course, is that I live in a high rise condo that overlooked the river, and I can still see the spot from which my father boarded the ship on April 30th, 1975, and sailed out to sea. It is now part of a high rise condo as well.
When we spoke, Andrew still hadn't visited his childhood home.
Because it's not there exactly anymore. The population grew so much, and the house is broken down and rebuilt. So I'm told. I just don't know if it's worth standing in front of it anymore. I have such fond memory of my childhood that I think I rather preserve it in memory rather than seeing the reality of it now.
Do you think that memory would be corrupted?
Yeah, I fear that. Recently, a friend of mine who left Vietnam about the same age that I did and became my best friend in America. He came back, and the both of us went to a country club that we belonged to. And it was a place of great joy of our childhood memory in Saigon during the war. So we both sort of say, let's go in and look at it. Unfortunately, it's been sort of abandoned in a state of dilapidation. But we went to the pool where we used to swim as children, and it's still there. And so we dip our toes in it and sort of, in a way, say hello, but also say goodbye to that childhood.
Even when Mir Hussein Mahdavi lived in Afghanistan, home was a complex idea. He is Hazara, a mostly Shia Muslim ethnic community that's long been persecuted.
One of the very, very significant ways that Hazara could express their deep miseries was music. And the type of the music that Hazara had used, called dambura. It's undeniable that music had played and has played in my life a very significant role in dealing with the problems that I have. So problems such as immigration, refugee, war, destructions, loss, all those issues were somehow coming to music to be resolved.
Mir Mahdavi also finds resolution and refuge in the music of Afghan singer Hangama.
Hangama is one of a very leading voice and character in music and in culture. Personally, I listened to her songs for such a long time that her voice becomes part of a joy of feeling of being at home, or someone who is from a land called Afghanistan.
My name is Hangama. I'm a singer from Afghanistan, and I'm living since over 20 years here in Canada, in Toronto.
You began singing at 15 years old?
Yes. Yeah, I was 15 years.
And how did you get started? What is it that inspired you to start singing?
Oh my God. I think I born in music and a singer, because my mom says when I was 2 years, like 3 years, and this time I sang always la 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 like that. But I loved music. And this time, no YouTube, no television in Afghanistan, nothing. So always asked my father, please bring me in radio.
In those times, she went by her real name, Zohra. She'd listen to the radio at home and sing with her father, who was also a musician.
And this time, it was difficult to come for singing. The situation was in Afghanistan always, for a woman, is hard time.
Still, at age 15, her father took her to the Radio Afghanistan studio, where they immediately recognized her talent. And so began a prolific musical career. Her mother gave her the stage name of Hangama. She grew into one of the most famous female musicians in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s, and into the image of a modern Afghan woman, short-haired, full makeup, often a solitary swaying figure on a makeshift stage. And for many Afghans living abroad, her music became synonymous with home.
I like her older songs, which is all about separation. And for some reason, I think we Afghan people are very much attached to the theme of separation, because that defines our lives. Separate from our homeland, separate. Even within Afghanistan, we have been displaced so many times. We lost the sense of the homeland connected to our ancestors. So it's very strong in us. And her songs and her husband's song, when they sang together, it was all mostly about separation. Of course, their separation defined the love, separation of lover from beloved. But when it comes to separation from homeland, it's very much similar. Are we not in love with our homelands?
I was walking through the halls at the Scarborough Hospital. I kept seeing the word hospital, but the chef inside of me was obviously registering the hospitality. And then, like in the middle of that sort of, rather gloomy hallway, I was like, wait a minute. wait a minute, what is this all about? These words are so close. What is this all about? And I literally went into the office that I had and looked it up. Right? I was like, linguistic roots of the word hospital is what I was chasing.
It comes from hospitium, or a refuge, a place where you can go and stay.
It's also from the Latin root hospice,
the word for stranger or foreigner. So to me, the hospital is a place of caring for that stranger or foreigner. My name is Rachel Kowalski. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician, and I work at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City.
My chef eyes know hospitality, and the definition around hospitality as being the relationship between guest and host. And it really emphasizes the idea that it doesn't matter who arrives at your table. My name is Joshna Maharaj. I'm a chef and activist and new author. I've just written a book called Take Back the Tray, Rethinking Food Service in Public Institutions, Hospitals, Schools, and Other Public Institutions. This is, I think, one of the most beautiful things about hospitality. It's regardless of the face, whether they can pay, like it does not matter. A guest is a guest.
Food is a huge part of hospitality for me. And that might be just my background. My dad is Guatemalan and my mom is Ashkenazi Jewish from Lithuania. And every family gathering and every religious holiday is related to food, a lot of food. I think about that a lot, actually, when I work. And the nurses always tease me because I always show up with leftover Halloween candy that my kids didn't eat or something from the school fundraiser, boxes of candy, whatever I have around. I think it's just a way to acknowledge that a person is human and has human needs and human hungers. And it kind of acknowledges that as a shared thing between a doctor and a patient. We're both human. We both need the same things. And also just on a really basic level, what do you need? Are you freezing? I'll bring you a blanket. We've got lots of graham crackers and juice. Sometimes we even have meals.
What's the most vivid example you can remember of hospitality in action in a hospital?
So there is the Murrow Health Center in Sioux Lookout. For whatever lovely coincidence, my parents lived in Sioux Lookout for a few years. My mom was a pharmacist, and she wanted to spend her last working years doing something more interesting than her suburban life. So they moved up, and my dad was quite sick. He actually spent his last days in Sioux Lookout, but specifically at the Murrow Health Center. And so I went to visit them and I learned about their country food program, which is a food program that they have specifically for Indigenous patients, where a provision is made to offer Indigenous patients access to their traditional food. So we're talking about wild game and proteins, but there's also berries and different wild rice and different grains.
A lot of our patients have been here for a long time. So when you serve them their own traditional foods, you make them happy. I'll give you an example. If you're giving moose meat to an elder that's been here a long time, of course they'll comment on the food, the taste and all that. But if you sit down, they'll start telling you stories. Stories of their moose hunt back in their younger days, or certain years, how the weather was. If you can take them back, even momentarily, like half an hour or an hour, back to a time where they were healthy, where they were out in the land, that they were at their most healthy physically, their most strongest spiritually and emotionally. You've done your job if you can do that.